Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here tonight and welcome you to Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center's Lakin Lecture Series on Antisemitism. I am Lori Shepard, Executive Director, and on behalf of myself and our Board of Directors and our amazing little staff, we want to thank you all for taking time out to be here with us tonight, whether you are here in person or whether you are on Zoom. I'm going to speak to the folks on Zoom for just a second. We understand that there's a little internet issue, and so there's a little bit of lag. If you're lagging right now and you're worried you're not going to see this fabulous program, don't worry, because we're also recording it back there in the back. And so by tomorrow, we will also make a video available. So if anybody misses something tonight, if you keep getting that lag symbol, don't worry, we will have it for you. Tonight is our second in the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center's 2024-2025 Lakin Lecture Series. And we are just so grateful to everybody who makes this possible. We could not do this without the amazing folks here at the J, without our partners with Jewish Philanthropies of Southern Arizona, and individual supporters such as Michael and Maria Zakaria. And of course, I always want to acknowledge that there's one very special donor whose support and vision has been with us every step of the way. As you know, that individual established the Ed and Alma Lakin Education Fund at Jewish Community Foundation of Southern Arizona to honor her parents, Alma and Eddie Lakin, for their lifelong commitment to Holocaust education, the people of Israel, to Jewish life, and to combating anti-Semitism. This annual series is such an amazing way to honor and to honor their legacy and to continue the work that they started, just as they did with their own lives through social justice and advocacy work. We will continue to tackle those tough topics that weigh heavy on our community's hearts and minds. And as you know, we kicked off last month. We kicked this series off last month by welcoming Rabbi Jonah Pesner here to talk about anti-Semitism and the threats to our democracy. And this evening, we are going to tackle anti-Semitism and campus life with Professor Jacques Berlinerblau. Now, as I said when we were together last time, I'm going to remind you of this every time. We all come together knowing that this presentation and these lectures that follow will not end anti-Semitism. Nothing alone will do that. But we do this and we are confident because we have seen that when we put this in action, it helps educate us, it helps empower us, and it brings us together as Jews and as Jewish allies to find hopeful and positive ways forward through some problems that feel fairly insurmountable. Our goal tonight with this series is not to point out all of the problems and kvetch about them, but to equip us with some tools that we need to face those challenges together. So tonight we are joined by someone who has seen and faced these challenges firsthand, who studied them as an administrator and educator, and works daily to make them better. Professor Jacques Berlinerblau is a professor of Jewish civilization at Georgetown University. He's also a contributing columnist for MSNBC. He toggles between pure academic writing and more public-facing endeavors, like what he's doing here with us tonight. He has written just a few books, 12, and he's published nearly 40 scholarly articles, which he was gracious enough not to ask me to read the names of all. He is considered a leading scholar on the subject of political secularism. He has also written a book about Black-Jewish relations, and he has written about the Jewish American writer Philip Roth. He's currently working on a little lighter book about comedians who get in trouble around the world. Some of the titles of his books, which are worthy of sharing, are Blacks and Jews in America, An Invitation to Dialogue, Campus Confidential, How Colleges Work or Doesn't for Professors, Parents, and Students, Secularism, Basics, and then Secularism, the Basics Expanded. And one of my personal favorite is Thumpin' It, The Use and Abuse of the Bible in Today's Presidential Politics. His next book, Can I Laugh at That? Global Comedic Controversies in the Digital Age, is coming out in 2025. Now, by his own admission, our topic tonight will not be light and uplifting, but he has promised to make us laugh just a little bit along the way. So I ask you to please help me welcome Dr. Jacques Berlinerblau.
All right. Good evening, Tucson. Good evening, Tucson. Okay. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, just to see little old me talking about campus anti-Semitism. I want to thank Laurie Shepard, the indefatigable Laurie Shepard, for giving me the most amazing tour of cacti, so Soiree, whatever. Just a beautiful little city. And I was telling her today that I thought Tucson was the type of place you need to spend some time in to really understand. It's not a one-day city. You're not a one-day city. You're a 3, 4 day city, I would say, to visit. All right, so we start there. Um, I also want to thank the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center for hosting us tonight. I'm going to preface these remarks by saying this is very bleak. I work with two student research assistants at Georgetown, both Jewish women, and they were kind of pulling some data that I needed and just reminding me of some dates. And they were looking over my lecture and they were like, "This is kind of sad." And I was like, "Oh, this is very, very sad." So even though I'm working on comedy now and I have a lot of fun doing my research, I regret to say tonight might not be that fun. What I will try to do is explain some things to you that I don't think are widely understood about what is going on in American college campuses. And I hope I'm going to offer you these tools when you walk out of here to better understand what's coming at you and why it's coming at you. I don't think this is widely understood. All right, so let's go. Let's begin with last semester. There is little doubt in my mind that Jewish students on campuses across the country are stressed as they have never been before. I have never seen anything like it. I started my career in 1995 at Brooklyn College. I've chaired Jewish studies programs. I've worked in Jewish studies programs. I've directed them. I've built them. I've never seen anything like this. Last semester, we witnessed scenes at Columbia, UCLA, University of Michigan, Tulane, I understand the local university, University of Arizona, and countless other elite schools that were deeply, deeply disturbing. How disturbing were they? So disturbing at a place like Columbia University in New York that the NYPD brought officers back to campus for the first time in half a century. Muslim and Jewish students reported being intimidated walking across campus. A recent unauthorized demonstration, it was back in March, I believe, which may have included a student affiliated with a terrorist organization, was under investigation by the NYPD. Many students at Columbia have been suspended or placed on probation. As the co-chair of Columbia's Board of Trustees, Claire Shipman, said, when people feel fear and intimidation, they cannot learn, which is interesting because I had written that 2 months prior. So I don't know if great minds think alike, or I don't know if the thought had trickled down. My argument against constant nonstop campus protest was nobody's learning right now. Everybody's stressed out. Students are scared to go to class. There's palpable intimidation on the quad. We're not fulfilling our academic mission. And the foremost job of an academic institution is not untrammeled free speech. I'm an expert in free speech. That's what I write about. Political secularism is downstream from free speech. What happens on a college campus is expert speech. That's what we defend. We defend the right of scholars to say things that people might not like, and we can say it because we have tenure. We'll talk about that in a moment. And because we have unique competencies that we were trained in across years and years and years and years. That's what should be defended on a college campus. A hey, hey, ho, ho chant, flyering, desecrating flags. I'm not saying it should be completely eliminated from what happens on a college campus, but it's definitely not the primary mission of what an institution of higher education is supposed to accomplish. So these were my arguments as I was working through them over last spring. Okay, then came the fall. This semester, the protests are less frequent, but the few that we are seeing are rather disturbing in the following respect. A Washington Post article from a few days ago called attention to the explicit pro-Hamas and pro-Hezbollah rhetoric that is now being articulated on college campuses. Jewish students are experiencing a good deal of unpleasantness, I feel, that their parents can't even recognize because it's happening on campus and it's also happening on social media. In terms of the pro-Hamas and pro-Hezbollah, what we're seeing are slogans that we weren't seeing necessarily last spring. So something like "Glory to the Resistance," that's not something we were used to seeing. That's a very coded term that is clearly an endorsement of terrorist organizations. So there's less ostensible protesting on college campuses, but what we are seeing is kind of a harder core. And we might discuss this in the Q&A, why there are fewer people, but those that are actually protesting are beholden to much more extreme positions. I spoke about social media, and I'm looking around the room, and I just think everyone's roughly my age or a little older, except for the kids in the front row. Here's an anecdotal story from a student. A student reported to me that he was pressured to like anti-Israel posts. And while my generation might scream, "Big deal, kid, deal with it," for that generation, this is really, really hard. A lot of their lives, for better or for worse, and I would say worse, is led online. And they have codes and mores and customs and traditions that older folks don't necessarily understand. But they understand them and they understand what the significance of it is. So, an innocuous post, one of my research assistants was telling me the following. She posted an innocuous post about Hanukkah, and she received a torrent of Free Palestine retorts and other such aggressive comments, right? So, happy Hanukkah, everyone, right? And then your feed is kind of littered with these political comments, and some of them might be people you know, people you're in class with, people that might be your teaching assistants. And this is what I think the older generation might not be completely sensitive to. More substantively, it can be very easy for Jewish students on campus to be shunned by their classmates. Or, and this I'm particularly interested in, some get the sinking feeling that for some reasons their professors look at them askance for supporting the existence of the state of Israel. And you have to have a lot of classroom experience and work with students to understand what that's like. But every now and then you'll have a student that just, you feel this student feels you're not vibing with them or you're not interested in them. And for me, it's obviously not on Israel Palestine. It might be about something else. So then you go speak to the student, you're like, "Hey, what's up? What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, I felt you didn't take my contribution seriously," and you iron it out. Now, I don't sit in other professors' classrooms. That's kind of the mystery meat of higher education. It's extremely rare that professors view what other professors are doing. But if I understand the dynamics of a college classroom and I understand what my students are telling me, they feel this is all tacit and unspoken. That they just have this weird sensation that they might not be called upon, or their comments are shut down a lot faster than they normally would be. And when I was a graduate student, I experienced a little bit of that, and it was kind of demoralizing, but it was nothing like this in terms of the broader political context. All right, in general, I'll say this. This is probably the hardest time to be a Jewish American that I can recall in my lifetime. Or maybe it was just wonderfully easy, at least compared to other diasporic Jewish experiences, until, and I think the signal year is 2016. Prior to 2016, I go as far as to say that Jewish Americans lived in something of a diasporic golden age. I would trace the end of that golden age to 2016, and it achieved maximum negativity after October 7th, 2023. When did it begin? I do believe it began in 2015, and a member of our faculty was the former head of the ADL, Abe Foxman. And I remember in 2015, people didn't fully understand who Donald J. Trump was, but Foxman did because he had been following him for years, and he was kind of delivering what I thought were very, very aggressive, very politicized lectures at Georgetown. He was a member of my faculty. And in retrospect, I now understand what he was saying. So this is what Foxman would say. He would speak of a coarsening of public discourse, which is always historically bad for Jews. So when public conversations are full of name calling and ranting and picking on certain groups and chanting, this has a correlation with deleterious outcomes for Jews who are obviously always in the minority everywhere except for the state of Israel. In 2015, it was the president who, excuse me, it started in 2015 when when President Trump said to the Republican Jewish coalition, "Is there anyone in this room who doesn't negotiate deals? Probably more than any room I've ever spoken to. And you're not going to support me, even though I'll be the best guy for Israel." In July 2016, well, let's go to August 2017, the Unite the Right event in Charlottesville, about which we needn't say anymore. October 2018, the tragic Pittsburgh shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue that left 11 dead. In 2018, President Trump said a lot of people say George Soros is funding the migrant caravan. That was an interesting cross-pollinating of different issues. And then a comment he made in 2019, which really struck a nerve in Washington's Jewish community in the District of Columbia. President Trump said, Jewish Americans who vote for the Democratic Party show, quote, either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. It was the reference to disloyalty that kind of rang everyone's fight or flight bells. People who knew the history of Judaism in the diaspora. Jews are often accused of being disloyal, and this is often a prelude to very, very negative acts perpetrated against Jews. So at Georgetown, it was on C-SPAN, we did a panel called Disloyal, where we had 5 speakers talking about the significance of the particular use of that word and the accusation that Jews were disloyal. In 2024, I could do 25 minutes about remarks by Donald Trump about the Jews. Trump argued any Jewish person that votes for Democrats hates their religion. And he said that in an interview with Sebastian Gorka, a former Trump administration official on one of Gorka's shows. These examples um, could be, or this is coming from the right, or now let's talk about what's coming from the left. At Cornell University in New York, anonymous threats flooded an online message board, and one of them was, if you see a Jewish person on campus, follow them home and slit their throats. At Tulane University in Louisiana, 2 students were assaulted as another attempted to burn an Israeli flag. At the University of Maryland, students found Holocaust 2.0 chalk on campus sidewalks. So Jews are in a very odd position here. I'm going to use the term a pincer. The dilemma, this is one of the many dilemmas that American Jews are facing today, is they're torn between a MAGA right that doesn't understand or like the fact that Jews vote the way they do. 80% of American Jews, according to recent exit polls, and 88% of Jewish women voted for the Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris. That's a pretty astonishing figure, if only because the trend lines were going the other way. It seemed that there was a much larger shift of Jewish Americans towards the Republican Party. It seemed to be a long 30, 40-year slow slide. And then suddenly, Jewish Americans were voting roughly 80 to 90%, depending on gender, for Kamala Harris. Their voting patterns, fascinatingly enough, as you know, I write about African Americans and Jewish Americans, are almost identical to African American voting patterns. So maybe in another lecture someday, we'll talk about what was known as the Grand Alliance or the Civil Rights Coalition between blacks and Jews, which fell apart. And one of the recent reasons it fell apart is over the issue of Israel-Palestine. And here these two groups are left alone, estranged from one another, and licking their wounds because their electoral power has shown to be something of a paper tiger. And it's something that African Americans and Jewish Americans are both going to have to reflect upon together, right? The vaunted coalition that could do anything, that could give us the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, Brown versus Board of Education. These are great accomplishments in American history. And this is really African American, Jewish American um, collaboration. Um, that is not really part of the current narrative. The current narrative is not one of great success, of these two groups working together in victory. They're working apart in loss, even though politically they agree on almost every single political issue, except for the question of Israel-Palestine. It's absolutely fascinating. All right, on we go. So this dilemma, I want to repeat, I don't want to over bleak the custard, right? But I'm trying to show you what the tensions are and the dilemmas that Jewish Americans are facing today. The first dilemma, again, is this kind of right-left pincer. So it's this paradox of being vilified by both the right and by the left as well. The second has to do with the situation in Israel itself. There is also the very complex question of Jewish responses to October 7th and the ensuing war in Gaza. I'll speak for myself, but I think I speak for many Jews. We are uniformly appalled, disgusted, and sickened by the horrors of October 7th. Yet, I know very few Jews who are not troubled by the policies and actions of the Netanyahu government. That's kind of a classic Jewish liberal position. And this creates a second tension. So we have the right-left tension. We have American Jews that are trying to calibrate their love and support for the state of Israel with their disagreement with many of the policies of the current government. Then there's a third paradox, which I want to bring to your attention, which is making life very, very tense for American Jews. And that's the problem of being instrumentalized by the Republican Party. If you read some of my stuff in MSNBC, I it's funny because I was telling my editors this is a really important story. These congressional hearings by the United States House Committee on Education and the Workforce are really, really important. And there's like a little bit of pushback, not for political reasons. I just don't think they understood the significance. And then all of a sudden, this became one of the biggest stories of 2024. For those of you that are wondering what I'm speaking about, there were three congressional hearings headed by the Republican-led House Committee on Education and the Workforce. The first was in December 2023, and it featured President Liz McGill of University of Pennsylvania, Claudine Gay of Harvard, and Sally Kornbluth of MIT. A few weeks after that hearing, two of those three presidents were no longer presidents anymore. The second hearing was in April 2024. This is the most consequential one, which was just Columbia University, and it was Minouche Shafik, who was then president of Columbia University, and the two chairs of her board of trustees, both of whom I believe were Jewish. We know what happened. I remember covering this in real time. It was on a Monday in late April. Shafiq delivered her testimony. It was on a Tuesday, actually. Within 6 hours, Columbia University went into lockdown, and a paroxysm of protests started like wildfire, spreading across the United States with Columbia University as the epicenter. This past summer, Shafiq, as we know, stepped down while all this is going on. Ali Stefanik is writing celebratory tweets, right? One more to go. And I'll explain to you what I think is happening there in a moment. Okay, so let's go on to the next and four. In May of 2024, another congressional hearing, this time President Michael Schill of Northwestern University, President Jonathan Holloway of Rutgers University, and Chancellor Jean of UCLA. The latter two are gone, right? So these hearings, which are kind of these performative spectacles, uh, really have left an indelible mark on American higher education. Now, how I said that American Jews are being instrumentalized. So you have the GOP. It's about 15 hours of testimony. I've listened to every single minute of it. It's actually very, very interesting. And if you have questions about it, we can talk about it afterwards. You have the GOP ostensibly, and I think we're all pretty happy about this, in the name of combating anti-Semitism, holding these hearings where they're asking college presidents, what on earth has happened on your campus? Why is this happening? Which I think many of us in this room would, to a certain degree, applaud. But here's the problem, all right? The true intention of the GOP, I suspect, is to reset and recalibrate the relationship between higher education and the government. The Republican Party has successfully test run these assaults on higher education in states with a Republican supermajority. In Ruby Red, Florida, and Texas, they've commandeered entire schools, tried to ban tenure, yep, DEI initiatives. Now, on the federal level, they're deploying the power of the government to intimidate and regulate even private educational institutions. The message to universities across the country from these hearings was as follows. Virginia Fox, representative from Virginia, is watching. You will be summoned to the Capitol and asked to resign. By hearing's end, the President, liberal snowflake, egghead the fourth, your quad will be aflame. So what was I seeing? I was seeing a sort of Trojan horse maneuver in which the GOP was bringing these presidents to heel in front of them and creating absolute chaos in their aftermath. But many of those GOP representatives that were asking the most probing questions um, had clear affiliations with white supremacists. When I say clear, they're on stages with white supremacists. They're retweeting they're being retweeted by white supremacists. So again, Jews are kind of in the middle, I think, as they're trying to understand what's happening. You have Republican politicians who are pounding the lectern about anti-Semitism, which I think Jews agree with. But by the same token, if you look at the track record of many of those doing the pounding, they are a piece with white Christian nationalism. So, how sincere is this effort to get to the bottom of why there's so much anti-Semitism on American college campus? So I'll repeat the phrase that I used before. Jews are being instrumentalized, right? Jews are being used as a pawn, as a Trojan horse, as a battering ram for the GOP to continue its 15-year-long and quite successful assault on American public universities. So how does that make Jews feel? Well, it's up to individual Jewish folks, right? How they feel. Some people are like, okay, we need to do that tactically. Others find that very, very difficult to accept. Okay, now we're going to get into the newest thing you're going to learn about today, and I call this the trinary. Bear with me, and this is a little inside baseball, and I'm going to try to explain to you what you're seeing when you see all of this agitation on a college campus. And the best part is I know I'm absolutely right. Okay, here we go. Having spent a quarter century, well, 30 years now, teaching and having chronicled some of the mega controversies that occur on campuses along the way, I notice a common error that happens when the press talks about college campuses. I don't think Americans really understand campus culture, and this makes it hard for them to understand what is happening vis-a-vis Israel-Palestine at American institutions of higher education. What's the mistake? Americans conflate academic culture with political culture in the United States. In American political culture, we have two major blocks, liberals and conservatives, blue and red, Democrats and Republicans. Those are the key belligerents engaged in a pitched battle on every conceivable issue for the soul of the country. Everyone got that? Right? That's the way we think about our politics. I feel that's more or less accurate. We have tiny little third parties. They're kind of burdensome and nuisance-like, but they're very, very small. All right, let's talk about what's going on a typical American college campus. The liberal conservative divide At almost any college in America, and I'll talk about what the exceptions are in a moment, and especially at an elite college, is fairly irrelevant to the Israel-Palestine issue. That's because in American academic culture, there exist not two, but three broad ideological camps, and neither liberals nor conservatives are center stage. Anyone who teaches on an American college campus knows that this framing of blue and red, liberal and conservative, is incorrect. Politically, American academia is nothing like American political space. The latter is generally divided between Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, blue and red, but a college faculty, generally speaking, is not sliced in two, but into three antagonistic columns of unequal size and influence. It's not a binary, it's a trinary. The fault lines I'm discussing are most evident amongst the faculty. Let's get to the three camps, shall we? The smallest of the three camps is comprised of professors whose political leanings are conservative. We have heard conservative intellectuals complaining for close to a century that they are underrepresented on American college campuses. And you know something? They're absolutely right. The statistics bear them out. Every study we've undertaken of the ideological leanings of the American professorate says these guys are absolutely right, and they're usually guys, interestingly enough. Where do we find conservative college professors? If you're going to find them, you find them in the business school, you find them in theological seminaries, and maybe in STEM disciplines. As researchers have demonstrated again and again, these scholars are drastically underrepresented on college faculties and in the humanities in particular. Consider this mind-boggling statistic. 3% of sociologists and 2% of literature professors identify as Republicans. When conservatives charge that they're outnumbered by campus liberals, they're correct about one thing and wrong about another. All right, but does that mean the liberals rule the roost, run the penitentiary, rule the academy, fostering the type of oppressive environment that demonizes Israel and conservative worldview? In my experience, no. In my experience, liberal professors play far less of a role in these incidents than a group we might refer to as the radical left, or more technically, the post-colonial left. All right, who are they? Um, Post-colonial scholarship is really interesting, and I spend most of my time working within it and on it, and I have significant respect for it as an intellectual discourse. I don't agree with any of it, but I've learned a lot from it. I place it on my syllabi every semester. I teach it to my students because I must, because it's basically the currency of so much thinking in the humanities today in higher education. So what is it, you might want to know? Uh, the third camp is composed of a vast and diverse array of quite serious scholars whose animus towards liberal ideas often exceeds their disdain for conservative ones. So do you guys all remember the Atari game board? Remember the Atari game board? So you'd go off this end and you'd come back this end, right? So you've got the right over here, you've got the left over here, you've got the center over here. The argument I want you to understand is sometimes positions on the fringes are so radical that they sort of line up with one another, right? So the far right and the far left often say things that are mind-bogglingly similar. Uh, Dislike of state power being one of them, hatred of big science being another. I could go down a laundry list of things these two ideological columns share. So let's understand our three columns, right? We have this small group of conservative professors. We have this graying middle of liberal professors. And then we have a much larger slice, which we will refer to as the post-colonial left. And I don't want anyone to walk out of this room saying I slandered them or I did not respect their scholarship. I do. I work on it. You can read my scholarship. I think about them a lot. I just don't agree. Okay, so this camp, if you want to conceptualize the differences between liberal and post-colonial leftist professors in political terms, think of it this way. Liberal professors are the type that voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and Kamala Harris in 2024. Radical left professors likely wrote both of them off as those dreaded neoliberals, Their votes might have been cast in 2016 in the primary for Bernie Sanders, though they might have concluded that he was way too much of a sellout and mainstream, as strange as that might sound. And they most likely voted for Jill Stein in the 2016 election and the 2024 election, or in the present election, Jill Stein or Cornel West, or maybe some other candidates who are so obscure we don't know who they are. All right. So in 2024, these dynamics were clearly at play. I remember asking some of my students, so who are your professors voting for? It was kind of a leading question. And one of my students said, yeah, all my post-colonial professors are voting for Jill Stein. We had, you know, we smiled. We're like, okay, everyone's entitled to their vote. Yet, whereas Jill Stein in 2016 received 1% of the popular vote, a recent study demonstrated that these so-called post-colonial professors comprise between 50 to 45% of the humanities at most elite universities. I think the number is too low. I think the number is actually 60 to 70%. So when I look at an English department, when I look at an art history department, when I look at a women's studies department, anthropology department, sociology department, I basically see this vast umbrella of post-colonial scholarship. You could call it postmodern. That's another term that bubbles up. Are they all identical to one another? Absolutely not. It's like potpourri. There's a whole vast universe of thought there. But what are the common assumptions? And maybe everything will start to come together for you, and you'll have this kind of aha moment when we discuss what the epistemological roots of this view are. Here we go. As far as many conservatives are concerned, liberals and leftists all look alike. But the differences are extremely significant, especially if you work on a college campus. I'm a liberal, by the way, right? I'm an old school classical liberal. I don't know how much longer we'll be around, but here we are. So we're going to enjoy it while we can. What are the differences between liberals and the radical left? Liberals did not exult over Iran's 1979 Islamist revolution, as did the immensely influential philosopher Michel Foucault, the patron saint of today's academic post-colonial left. Liberals would never wish that the United States suffer, quote, a million more Mogadishus, or refer to the victims of 9/11 as little Eichmanns, to invoke some memorable fringe left catchphrases. Liberals don't whip themselves up into a frenzy over the legitimacy of the State of Israel, a position associated with the esteemed literary critic Edward Said, who incidentally just ran the penitentiary at Columbia University. That was really his place, right? And the fact that we see this type of agitation at Columbia is not at all coincidental. All right, now it gets really mind-boggling for people who aren't in academia. Liberals don't reflexively deconstruct and place shutter quotes around concepts such as enlightenment, democracy, reason, religious freedom, and secularism. So I'd imagine some of you are saying, wait, what's wrong with democracy? Well, welcome to my world. And I know we have some professors here, right? What's wrong with the Enlightenment? Wasn't the Enlightenment a good thing? We could speak about this in our seminars. It's rather complicated. It's very fascinating. And the critique itself is not necessarily anti-Semitic. I want to stress that. In and of itself, the criticism wasn't based on anti-Semitism per se. A very common post-colonial left criticism will argue that the North Atlantic slave trade and the Holocaust are born of the same Enlightenment poisoned root. So if you want to understand how they think things through, we're dealing with extraordinarily heady and obtuse stuff, which I've learned my best undergraduates cannot understand. So I have to really break it down for them and kind of offer them a premiere. Even graduate students wrestle with this type of stuff, and you all are skilled in your professions and you do things that are not academically oriented. So I wouldn't expect you to read this and understand what it's all about. Nevertheless, this is my understanding of this particular content. All right, which brings us back to a lot of the free speech issues that we've been discussing. Liberals are generally made highly uncomfortable by censorship, speaker boycotts, trigger warnings, safe spaces, and the like. Liberals also tend not to support blanket anti-Zionism. They tend to be, like liberal Jews, critical of far-right governments, but never fellow travelers or aficionados of Marxist-style political formations. So they are generally the liberals, supportive of Israel, in the belief that it is a democracy that needs to undergo a significant course correction, but they are not ready, as with their colleagues on the far left, to suggest that the destruction of the state of Israel would be a benefit for all and sundry. All right, so let's review. I know that was like a big drop of information. I'm arguing when you look at a college campus, if you're trying to understand where it's coming from this large, impressive, erudite column of post-colonial scholars who, for whatever reasons, have come to completely dominate the elite faculties in the humanities and the softer interpretive social sciences over the last half century. And that's what you're seeing on a college campus. That's where the anger is coming from. And to blame it on liberals would be a tremendous, tremendous category mistake. All right. The indoctrination then that is occurring on college campuses is not liberal. Truth be told, I'm skeptical that professors of any political persuasion could successfully indoctrinate their students if they wanted to. So now we're getting to something even more complicated. Um, Something has happened in American higher education where the relationship between professors and students has been hopelessly fractured. For those of you that are roughly my age, you probably remember 10, 15 professors who you loved. You knew their names, you went to their office hours, played frisbee with them on the quad, babysat their kids. Those types of relationships have been eroding for decades. I have various theories as to why those relationships have eroded, but one of them has to do with the professional casualization of academic labor, by which I mean fewer and fewer professors are being granted a living wage to be professors. Tenure is slowly disappearing across the country, and the adjunctification of the American professoriate is in full swing. So there's sort of this massive disconnect between the professors and the students, and this complexifies my previous remark. So where are the students getting it from? And this is where I would argue, well, they're getting it from a general vibe on campus, I would say, of anti-Zionism, which they feel in their classes, which they feel coming from the faculty senate, which they feel sort of pervades uh, the halls of academia. But I think they're mostly getting it from social media. If I understand where radicalization is occurring, where folks that have no particular stake in the Israel-Palestine debate are getting their ideas from, as far as I can tell, when I speak to students, and I've got like great students that are flat out Israel haters. They're great students. They're really smart. So I asked them, so where are you getting the information from? And it's not like my thing, 'cause I'm not an expert on Israel Palestine, to give them long lectures about peace accords and you know the Oslo Accords and so on. That's not what I'm just trying to understand where it comes from. It's all coming from what they're reading on their smartphones. So let's go back to what the problem is, right? What is college for, right? College is to educate people into nuance, into complexity, into subtlety. And we as professors cannot perform that function if we're being systematically dismembered by the board of trustees and the administrations. Right? If 70, 80% of the faculty on most American college campuses now is part-time labor that doesn't know if they're going to be there more than 6 months, right, past the next semester, you can't expect them to commit to the serious, complicated work of pointing out how nuanced and how tensile and how exceedingly complicated this conflict actually is. So we have this problem where we can't go to the professors, many of whom know exactly what's going on. They know how difficult it is to break down these issues. We simply have lost a professoriate that's willing to do that. Regrettably, the professors who are most willing to do that, unfortunately, the ones who want to really get out ahead of the story, I find are the ones that are least intellectually or academically equipped to be speaking about it. And I want to talk about that a little bit in the Q&A. All right, so this generation of college students gets its facts from Google. It forges its politics via TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, Reddit, Telegram, BreadTube, and Instagram. Any professor who wants to be a political influencer basically can abandon the classroom and log on to these platforms and speak directly with students. And some professors do that, and I have mixed emotions about that. All right, I hope that's not too much bleakness. I'm going to give you some concluding remarks, and the best part of any professorial talk is the Q&A, and that's where you like measure if this professor is actually intelligent or just a dope. The next 4 years, unfortunately, look very unpromising for Jewish Americans. The Netanyahu government will continue doing what it does. Jewish liberals in the United States will continue, and in Israel, will continue to feel marginalized and stuck between being critical of Netanyahuism while being deeply committed to the safety, perseverance, and existence of the state of Israel. The GOP will continue its policy of using anti-Semitism as a battering ram in its ongoing war on American higher education. I am convinced the Republican Party wants to bring professorate in particular to heel. Right? The university with its DEI offices and all its highfalutin ideas and its data and its statistics and its people who research gun violence and rape culture, that is something that Republicans have devoted decades to dismantling, and they're just on the precipice of doing so. As for Jews, American Judaism, intra-group tensions amongst American Jews are likely to be exacerbated. We can take solace from the fact, I can at least, that 80% of Jews voted for the Democrat in this election. However, the fault lines in American Judaism are becoming increasingly evident. In particular, ultra-Orthodox Jews who are gaining in demographic size find themselves not only theologically, but politically at odds with their more liberal co-religionists. I don't know if any of you looked at the voting data from the 5 boroughs in New York City. It is astonishing. And I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I still have a house in Brooklyn, New York. I know the neighborhood very well. My neighbors are ultra-Orthodox Jews. I speak to them all the time. I'm convinced they voted maybe 90% for Republican candidates and for Donald Trump, right? So the fault line to me is very, very clear. It is the ultra, not the modern Orthodox, it is the ultra-Orthodox Jews, Jews from the former Soviet Union, demographically in terms of polling data, do show a tendency to swing more Republican than other types of Jews, and extremely affluent Jews in certain types of industries also tend to prefer Republican candidates. So that fault line will continue to fault, if you will. You've asked me to speak about campus anti-Semitism. I regret to say that here as well, I do not see much in the way of hopeful signs that it will abate. The truth of the matter is that American higher education is undergoing something akin to an extinction event. Fewer and fewer professors are being tenured. This means that the faculty is going to congeal as it is right now. It's going to gray and get old in its present sociological form, and it's going to maintain roughly the same ideological composition that it presently has. So since we're not going to get a lot of fresh blood on the tenure line, on the tenure track in American higher education, the way an elite department at Stanford, at Georgetown, at Columbia, at NYU, at University of Arizona looks today is probably, ideologically speaking, the way it's going to look for the next 20 or 30 years, because we're not hiring in people to tenure track jobs, which might bring fresh ideas and new ways of looking at complicated geopolitical problems. At the elite universities, anyhow, the post-colonial anti-Zionist left will always have a foothold, if not an outright intellectual majority. And this too bodes ominously for the experience of pro-Israel Jewish students on campus. If I can offer you any solace, it's that college campuses have always been ideological outliers. For better or for worse, there are many reasons to suspect that anti-Israel views on campus do not necessarily reflect the views of most Americans, or even most students on campus. And that's where polling folks are going to have to get onto these campuses and start speaking to students about what they actually know and what they actually believe to be true about the conflict. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to thank you for enduring that torrent of negativity and bleakness. I hope we can have a really robust and open discussion about this, and I thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I appreciated your honesty ahead of time, but it still didn't prepare me. Um, so now as we move on to the Q&A portion of our program, I want to invite some very special guests that we have with us here today. Students from the University of Arizona are going to join us for this frank conversation and this short Q&A. As they come up, I want to tell you, I have a lot of opinions about what happens on campus because I have a sophomore. So, of course, I know everything. But we thought maybe instead of having people like me have opinions about it, we would ask them to join us and actually tell us what they're feeling and what they're experiencing, what they're seeing. So, would you all join us, please? We're going to have Dean Albert, Ellen Murray, Linus Lokshin, and Leah Thomas join this conversation. Now, now, because we would never be able to get through this Q&A if we just had the microphone out there. We do have cards and pencils, and so our team will come around and give you cards and pencils, and we will try to get to as many of those questions as possible. But I'm going to be honest that mostly what this Q&A is going to be about is the conversation between these folks up here with us today. All right, and so Dr. Berlinerblau, I'm going to let you take the lead up here. And and maybe we'll have everybody here. Is that on? Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Hello.
Good.
Hello.
All right, guys. Hi. Why don't you just first tell us all your names and what you're majoring in and what you're studying? Why don't we start with you?
Hi, my name's Leah, and I'm double majoring in public health and Judaic studies.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm majoring in psychology and philosophy.
I'm Linus, and I'm majoring in education with a focus in special ed.
I'm Dean. I'm a psychology and communication major with a minor in Judaic studies.
All right, great. Guys, I'm going to ask you, because you're much more interesting than me, to give us like 30 seconds, like just what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what maybe came up in that lecture that annoyed you or you nodded your head to. So let's do 30 seconds from each of you so we get a sense of what's on your minds. Please.
I found it really reassuring because it really matched what I've been thinking and made me feel really heard.
Okay, let's call it a night. Thank you.
I thought it was kind of depressing. It's sad to see what's happening on campuses and hear about it.
Good question for you. Does it mesh with what you're seeing on campus, like what I was talking about?
It does, and it like just hearing it makes it harder sometimes.
Yeah, I definitely think a lot of stuff you talked about is definitely something that we're seeing. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's been very overwhelming, especially as you said, since 2023, 24, kind of since October 7th. But yeah, it's I don't know what to make of it, especially during this election season. I felt, as you said, like I'm just in between this like pincer and I don't know. It's like hard to see where the what's right and what's wrong, like what choice you got to make. So.
Somebody disagrees with me, that would be better. Can you disagree with me?
I won't disagree with you, but I'll echo what my friends have said, that it's like reassuring, but also kind of terrifying that like it's not just like us that are feeling this way, that this is actually what's going on. I thought the trinary was very interesting. Um, I guess it's kind of cool to like know where my professors kind of lie. Like I don't know personally where they lie, but just understand like the dynamic of faculty. Just being more involved in organizational things, and I've talked to her name's Chrissy Lieberman. She's in charge of like First Amendment rights for us as students, and just being more involved with like talking to faculty and staff. I think it's interesting to know kind of what the dynamics are um, with that.
One thing I want to stress, and maybe we'll take some questions, or maybe you guys have questions for me or for one another. I really do want to stress this point, though, that this post-colonial theorizing, which is very heterogeneous, isn't necessarily anti-Semitic. It's anti-Western, it's anti-statist, it's anti-democracy, it's anti-enlightenment. So Israel is kind of exhibit A in a lot of its antis. So I know we are having this complicated conversation about the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. I'm often willing to give a lot of my colleagues on the post-colonial left the benefit of the doubt and assume they have nothing in particular against Jews. What the problem is that their philosophical, epistemological, ontological assumptions drive them to a ferocious critique of liberal democracies and flailing liberal democracies in particular, such as the United States and Israel. And the critique is, I find, suffocating. It doesn't offer any possibility other than the complete obliteration or the complete decimation of these types of political formations, which they don't like. I always ask them, so what's the alternative? And that's where I don't get clear answers. Fun fact, they like empire. I don't know. When I speak to they like empire for reasons that, like the Mughal Empire, the Ottoman Empire, it's kind of a quirk they have. That's a pre-modern, pre-Enlightenment way of ruling. So there's that. All right, why don't we take some quick questions or comments from everyone? Let's go this way. Is that Linus? Or you start? Dean, I'm sorry, Dean, please start.
Questions for you?
Or for one another, or
No, I don't have anything.
okay, Dean, Linus.
I'll pass.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I can ask you one.
Sure.
Maybe this is me being like too hopeful in the good of people, but why are professors who are like been through higher education and are still in higher education, why are they so against Israel?
Yeah, I feel it's just where the paradigms take them. And it's just how I was trained in this as well. We're trained to be very, very critical of the Enlightenment, of the West, of colonialism. And Israel is just this huge target that's in the middle of the news every single day. Something I wrote about in a piece for MSNBC, or it was the Chronicle of Higher Education. This is what puzzles me. Um, there is a full-scale slaughter of human beings going on in Syria. There are civil wars in Sudan and Ethiopia, Eritrea. We know about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, not to mention the looming dissolution of American democracy. So my question was, why did this one issue, Israel-Palestine, right, galvanize so many American undergraduates? That to me, I have no answer to that. I honestly have no answer to it. There was somebody who was writing, I believe, for Compact Magazine, who said, because Israel can be toppled, I forget who it was. You're never going to take out the United States with your far left criticism of capitalism and and colonizing nation states. You're never going to take out France. You're never going to take out Germany. You're not. But Israel is doable as a project. Israel is vulnerable. And that's why people gravitate to this type of activism, because they feel, oh, this might actually work, right? Our scruples and our protests might lead to concrete ends. All right, I'm going to take some of these questions. In the past, I was aware that guardrails existed as to how much any individual professor could push their own political views. What has happened to those guardrails? Any pressure brought to bear on those post-colonial times? I don't know if they were guardrails. We want a university where we have radical professors. I do believe that, and I might get tomatoes thrown at me. But when I went to NYU, we had Maoists, we had Marxists, we had like rapacious Kappa. We had all these like oddballs, really odd people. But here was the difference. This was in the early 80s. The percentages weren't off, right? So there wasn't the domination of one type of political worldview and the complete absence of others. So when you went to NYU or not Columbia, when you went to NYU in 1982, 1983, as I did, it was like bizarro potpourri, just all sorts of strange professors with strange fixations, with eccentric interests, but it didn't all line up in one direction. So what I think the problem is it's not the individual professor, it's the larger problem of the proportions of the professors. who seem to align ideologically. Do you guys have anything you want to say about that? Other than no? If you were to tweet something about this right now, what would it be? Or put something on Instagram, what would the, this is how you get them to like, really focus.
Yeah,
I guess personally in the public health field, a lot of my professors naturally lean liberal,
Mhm.
and I don't think I've encountered anything
They're
extreme.
liberal as opposed to radical left. That's what I'm saying. Right. Interesting.
I mean, yeah, in the College of Education, we actually had two professors suspended in 2023. Actually, they ended up getting their job back because they had some pretty anti-Semitic rhetoric in their class. They decided to do a lecture on the Israel-Palestine conflict, even though I don't think either of them were qualified. I wasn't in that class, but a friend of mine, she was in it, and got a lot of traction. The class in question was recorded, and I definitely think that is an issue. I've had multiple classes too, not like gen eds, where the professors seem to just kind of pick and choose what they want to teach us, especially in regards to kind of this kind of rhetoric, where when it's relevant, or like current events, Israel, Palestine, they'll just kind of throw it onto the class, and it seems like there's no repercussions. They can just kind of do it.
We call it going rogue or off-roading. When a professor who's not trained in a particular field has very strong opinions, right, on those issues, that's probably something that college administrations could do better on. I mean, if you sign up for macroeconomics, you don't want to harangue, right, about Gaza, right? I think that's fair, and students have a right to just demand that the course they're signing up for doesn't become a completely different course. How do you think the next 2 to 4 years of the Republican trifecta of the Trump administration will affect higher education? Very, very badly. Everybody is bracing for the worst. And when I spoke about instrumentalization, I meant it. If I felt, there were a couple, there was a guy, Jim Banks, I believe, from Indiana, and I actually felt that representative, Republican rep, cared. I don't know why. He was asking questions like, these are kind of like thoughtful. This person seems to care about anti-Semitism on campus. There were many representatives that I felt really weren't thinking about anti-Semitism. They were using these proceedings and the full power of the American legislative branch to hammer away at the legitimacy and the solidity of American higher education. So I predict some really, really bad years ahead. Who are the anti-Israel protesters? Foreign students from Muslim countries? What percentage of foreign students at elite colleges in Europe? It's a great question. Um, I'm going to ask the students what they think. My view is a lot of kids from the global south, maybe first generation kids from the global south. In particular, I know a lot of kids from India and Africa join these, if they're not Muslim, by the way, right? Join these protests. And a large column of kids whose relationship to this conflict is completely not discernible to me. I do not understand why this particular conflict would interest them. There are Jewish students on the anti-Zionist left. I'd love to see some numbers. I work with these kids a lot at Georgetown. They're really great kids. They're not demonic. They just have this animus towards Israel. And I talk to them, I tell them my views, but I'm not an expert on Israel Palestine. And we try to have a civil conversation. So I'm going to throw it back to the kids. What is the composition of anti-Israel activism on campus?
I would agree with that and add on community members. There's a large number of older people and people that have no affiliation with the university.
A lot of people have no affiliation with the university, right? That's probably correct. We saw that at Columbia University, and that became very, very clear that the violence was being promulgated by people that had no organic connection. A lot of my, not a lot, some of my students at Georgetown are anti-Israel. Um, and they're just not violent people, right? They're just not violent kids, right? They're screaming at these protests, but they're not by any experience or disposition inclined to destroy anything. They're just protesting, and I do think we have to understand that. What is your analysis?
From what I've seen, it seems like a lot of kids who are on the left who are out there thinking that they're doing the right thing.
So you're saying usually Anglos, right? Like white kids, white Christian kids on the left. Is that what you're pointing to?
Yeah, but not necessarily.
Okay, all right. Just the left in general, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at least at the U of A, as Leah said, there's a lot of just non university affiliated people. I'm not sure other campuses, but I think the if I were to make kind of a demographic, a majority of it are more like middle class left white kids. I won't say Christians. Actually, most of the religious people that I know, like white Christians, lean nowadays are more right and are more pro-Israel. But I think it's a lot of just kind of middle class white. Maybe I don't know what their religious beliefs are, but yeah, it's yeah.
Thank you.
So echoing what everyone else said, I agree. A lot, I think I don't know the exact numbers, but I've recognized and noticed that we have a lot of Middle Eastern transfer students, and they usually don't partake in the encampments and kind of heckle from the sidelines. There was an encampment where I was asking um, the facilitators about like what about the hostages and these things, and a Middle Eastern student asked me, um, ask your government. So he's standing from the sidelines, not really um, being involved with what's going on inside the encampment, but he's still part of the problem by kind of heckling me and what I stand for.
So a student getting heckled on campus, this is really where the administrations failed, right? The administrations, so what happened was, here comes October 7th. Here come these statements and media. Here come these protests. And all of a sudden, American college campuses become like these leafy sound stages for hey, hey, ho, ho chants and for kind of negative heckling and for screaming. This is where college administrations failed magisterially. What they should have done is marshaled their professorate, not for teach-ins, because we all know the kind of lineage of the teach-in, right? The teach-in is one professor just kind of agitating and poking, and they should have brought their experts, force them actually, incentivize them, right? I mean, it doesn't take much to buy off a professor, right? We'll come out for $150, right? Just get them up on stage and have them model proper discourse. I mean, it just upsets me that college campuses have become places where people are chanting and screaming and ripping things down. I was giving a lecture at Harvard in May on a different subject, and the gates were closed. It was uncanny. I'd never seen that before, right? You couldn't walk into Harvard Yard. It was locked down. So the optics for a liberal democracy are truly, truly terrible. Another question: how can we, as a community, help you develop tools to cope and support departments in the schools? And I imagine by the schools we mean the colleges. I think the American Jewish philanthropic community has really put a lot of skin in the game, right? They're trying to develop curricula. They're trying to bring professors to campus. I don't know if that philanthropy is working. Having worked with many Jewish philanthropists at Georgetown, I don't get the sense it's hitting its target audience, and I feel it needs like a radical rethink. And a lot of the work I do is um, bringing communities to talk to one another, like African American and Jewish American communities. And I'm gonna tweak this a little bit. Non-Jewish African Americans, community one, white Jewish Americans, community two, and Afro Jews, community three. All right, I feel that's a very innovative way of having this conversation because there's a large Afro-Jewish population in the United States, very varied, a lot of different types of theological views there. Those conversations are substantively different because of the presence of the Afro-Jews. I don't know why. It seems less binary. People are getting less angry. You have people of color who are Jewish, right, who are trying to like moderate between this white black binary, which has seared itself into our imaginations. So I think Jewish philanthropists are good hearted. They've tried to do right by higher education and right by Israel and right by the Jewish people, but a smarter class of advisors is necessary to think of brand new ways of of approaching the conflict. Okay, guys, anything you want to add?
Yeah,
Go
I have something to add. I respect people who try to bridge um, Jews and non-Jews. I don't think that mission is for me. I think there's a big divide within the Jewish community in America on what it means to be a Jew and why Israel is so important to Jews. So I try to focus on reaching out to my non-practicing or maybe like my non-practicing Jewish friends or friends that don't really come to Hillel or other Jewish organizations. I try to get them kind of like a foot in the door and kind of taste what it's like to be part of a community. Um, so like I know that programs at Hillel really help me um, like explore my Judaism and understand. Like I'm a special case because my parents are Israeli, so I understand my relationship with Israel, but not everyone does. And we have programs like Israel Learning Fellowships where you learn about Israeli culture and get money for it, which as a college student, money is great. Um, so that's where I see where like communities can help and like philanthropy is just like help out like us kids who are we like to say that like like universities are like the future of or future leaders or whatever. So like that I feel like for me as a student, that's where community can make a difference. I don't think it's showing up at protests. I don't like that. I don't like as much as we love you guys. It's not like I think a college campus and protest like should be run by students and like we love your numbers and we love your support, but like I think with programming is where that reaches us most.
So I just want to say something. Did you want to say something? I'm sorry. Please.
I did.
Please. No, no, you're more important than I am. Go.
I think something more practical that we also need to focus on is our homes and our communities for any types of prejudices we have, like focusing in your homes, talking to your family members, talking to your friends. Like those are the closest people to you, and where you can actually create real change that goes out further into the world. So if we focus on what's happening in our own homes and everyone else does the same, we can create real change.
All right. So now I'll say something a little bit controversial, which goes against the vibe. Um, I always understood my job as a professor to take the kid that comes in who is like ardently pro-Israel and to kind of like mess with their hair a little bit, right? You know, kind of like mess them up a little bit. Say, really, you're pro-Israel? What about this? You like this policy of the Netanyahu? Now, the assumption was that my Palestinian colleague was doing the same, right? So something collapsed in higher. The idea was a student with like hardcore, pro Netanyahu, pro settler um, worldview would have some run-ins with Professor Berlinerblau, and Professor Berlinerblau would problematize and interrogate their assumptions. But that only works if Professor Amin is doing the same to Palestinian students, right? And I think something has collapsed in the professorate where we're scared to do that, or we're not doing that anymore, or the professors who do that are extraordinarily vulnerable or shunned by their administrations and by their students. I just want to like complexify what I think the ideal professor should be doing. Professors should be like those oddballs I studied with in the 1980s. Those are the professors I loved, right? I love the ones that were politically inscrutable. Like you could not figure out what their politics were because they were so strange, but damn was it interesting, right? And that's not what I think these kids are getting. I think they walk into a classroom and I think they know really, really fast where this professor stands. And it's kind of rammed down their throat. And the proportions are off. I repeat, the proportions of political throat ramming are not equal, and that's why they likely feel that they're under siege. And this is where I think the problem sets in. Next question. There's a question here about funding. Do you think the tilt to anti-Israel activism is it part of the success? They mentioned Qatar, right? That's really who we should be talking about. So one of the pieces I wrote for MSNBC, you're free to peruse it. Uh, Pointed out that this House committee brought one really important fact to the fore. Uh, American higher education is awash in money from kind of autocratic hybrid regimes, as they're called, authoritarian regimes in the Middle East, awash to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars per semester, maybe like I think it was like $1 billion at Georgetown, $885 million, right? And so here's where things get complicated. That money seeds programs. The programs hire very good scholars. The programs only ask certain types of questions. And as one of my favorite professors once said, sometimes we ask certain questions because we'd so much like the answers, right? So what happened in American higher education is the Qataris, the Saudis, were investing majorly in professorships. That's undeniable. That's just a fact. The Jewish donors were doing something very, very different up until about 15 years ago, right? The Jewish donors were funding scholarships and funding Jewish studies programs, not Israel studies programs, right? And interested in like Jewish comedy and Jewish literature and Yiddish. Oh my God, Yiddish, right? There were like billions of dollars spent on Yiddish, right? Ladino, right? And then all of a sudden, around 2005, 2006, around the time of the war with Hezbollah, I think Jewish donors were like, we have to indulge in this arms race. And now you have an arms race. And I don't like it, right? So you have just scads of money coming in from the Middle East, and you have American Jewish donors that are playing catch up and trying to set up these Israel studies programs, right, to combat what is happening and what has been happening um, for the last 30 or 40 years. Nobody wins under any of those givens, right? That's not a winning educational formula. When universities and colleges are essentially for sale, right? And the wealthy can kind of buy their perspectives. So something got misaligned, right? Something got off course, and that's extremely unfortunate. The U.S. government, what can the U.S. government do about it? That was the question. Well, they can hold hearings, right? That's what the U.S. government with GOP-led committees decided to do. And the committees were, excuse me, the hearings were a huge embarrassment for American higher education, by the way. As much as I dislike the instrumentalization of the Jews, it was embarrassing, especially the Columbia session. And remember, Minu Shafik was in full apology mode. She's like, we're sorry, we're going to fix this. We know we have a problem. That's what triggered riots within hours of her testimony because she was saying, we're going to fix this, we're going to fix this, we're going to change things, right? And so she also was placed in an impossible position. To find the difference on college campuses between the Vietnam era protests and the current Gaza Israel protests, that's a really, really good question. Well, the Vietnam era protests, here's one difference. Were kids that didn't want to be drafted, right? They might have been anti-war. They didn't want to go to war, as I have read about the era, because people don't like to be killed, right? I think that's a very, very important difference. Whereas in these instances, um, a very small majority of those protesting are Palestinian, right? And I have noticed sometimes when you pull out the Palestinian student to speak to the Israel, it might not be a love fest, and it's a very, very different vibe as opposed to people who are protesting against Israel that are not Palestinian. So one way of getting at this is to kind of ask protesters, ask Palestinians to come up and talk to Israelis and to Jewish Americans. I think you'll get something very, very different as opposed to, let's say, a Muslim student from Pakistan, right? Or an Iranian student, right? Or students from China, right? I mean, I'm not saying they don't have skin in the game. I'm not saying they have no right, but they're somewhat at a remove from the discussion. So the answer to the question is the stakes were different for the majority of the protesters. I think we'll take one more. Is that okay? Okay. My sense is that student anti-Israel positions are at best skin deep. Might those positions evaporate as students graduate and join the real world, going the way of 70s Maoism and 60s pro-Viet Cong sentiments on U.S. campus? Could be, but there is something deep about anti-Zionist agitation. It's really deep. Now, granted, some people were just along for the ride. They were just there because they like to protest. I've got a theory, which I will share with you, which I hope will never get outside of this room. I feel if you speak to a lot of those, not all, so I'm going to say, be very clear, 20 to 25% of those students, I felt were really pissed in general. And they were mad about a lot of things, and they were right to be mad. And when I spoke to them, you know what they were mad about? They were mad about the lack of jobs, the job market that they were about to enter when they had been told there would be jobs in these sectors, so they trained for these jobs like good pre-professionals, and the jobs weren't there, right? So I'm not trying to remove their agency. I'm just saying some of these protesters were just mad. And this was a great place to be publicly mad and to publicly protest. With that said, I regret to say a lot of people that do activism against Israel are all in, and they don't change, right? They do this for decades and decades and decades. So it's a little bit of both. I'm going to ask Lori. Lori, one more, or do we shut it down?
Can I comment on that?
Oh, please, please. I'm sorry.
I think I don't think I know enough to have like a real opinion, but I know that like young people are very influenced by what they see online. You mentioned Twitch earlier. I know Twitch is going through like a lot right now. I know they banned IPs from Israel for people to register. Twitch is like a live streaming platform where um, recently it's been like honestly like a breeding ground for anti-Semites. They'll call for like death of Jews just outright, and these people aren't banned. So I think even if like you graduate college, you're still watching these people, or even worse, like high school kids are being fed this poison and go into college and then eventually are able to vote and become the leaders of the future. And so I don't think it's only a college problem. I think it's a deeper issue with kind of social media and just what we consume right now.
One of the great postmortems about the 2024 presidential election was by Michael Tomasky in the New Republic, where he said, look at media. Look at the fact that Donald Trump did 4 interviews in his final 2 weeks, which garnered 80 million views. There was nothing, door knocking in Pennsylvania, there was nothing that approximated this. So if our colleague says that social media is a huge driver, social media is a huge driver, that's what my next book is about, right? What social media does to comedy when it goes, all right, when it goes out into the entire world, and some people don't find the joke funny. I think the best way to end off is not through me. I'd like each of the students maybe to kind of sign off. Why don't you leave the audience with what you think they need to know about you or about your experience, and we'll end it there. So why don't you begin, Dean, and then we'll go to Linus, and then we'll.
Okay. My parents are Israeli. When I was 14, we made Aliyah. We moved to Israel. I did high school and I served 2 years and 8 months in the IDF. Um, Being in America during October 7th and not going back to fight is probably one of the things I deal with in terms of like guilt and like just internal struggles. And like being here right now is like how I fight this fight. And so like thank you guys for allowing me to speak here. Um, and yeah, like it's not just about the students, it's about you guys. So like I'm a soldier, you're a soldier, we're all soldiers, let's fight the fight together.
Yeah, I think just like a thing to leave on, at least something that I've been trying to remind myself every day, especially I think after the election, where I think the as Jews we need to all stay together, no matter kind of what side of the aisle we're on. We're all Jews. We're all bane of the world. Everyone wants to kill us, and so we have to stick together. We can't fight amongst ourselves, even if we do think we know what's right and the other one is wrong. We have to stay together, and we need to build this community because that's all we have. So I think just remember that, like, support the Jewish organizations, make sure that you're building a community and doing what you can to build a good Jewish community, because in the end of the day, that is all we have. And yeah.
This may be a little easier said than done, but I think it's super important to love yourself and your Judaism more than anyone hates you for it, and to continue living to be your authentic self, because we need to be loud and proud and out there, because that's the biggest revenge we could get for people who hate us.
For me, following October 7th, I really struggled with what my place in everything was. For me, I turned to writing and I published an article in the school newspaper, the Daily Wildcat, which had its own issues with the newspaper, but that was an outlet for me. And so I think it's important that we do whatever we can to be heard.
So everybody, thank you so much. Lori Shepherd, the Tucson Jewish Community Center, Jewish Philanthropies of Southern Arizona, Lakin Education Fund. Everyone, thank you so much. We're going to pass it on to you now.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Martin Reichgott. I'm the Director of Philanthropy at the Tucson Jewish Museum Holocaust Center. Once again, thank you to Dr. Berlinerblau for an incredible presentation that I know I'm energized and I'm rethinking a lot of what I thought I knew or what I thought I thought. Once again, the courage to come and share by these students and give us a perspective that we all need. We can't thank you enough because I know that when we all go home, when I go home, I'm going to share in my house your perspectives, and it's shaking up things. And for you to take time and to come here and show the courage to share something personal, we can't thank you enough. Thank you very much. And also, we have the most incredible community. This conversation doesn't move without your questions. And I'm just throwing out there, these are the insightful questions that we come together to share. So I thank you for your participation. And, I want to point out, one, this is a Thursday night. We're energized. My heart rate is up. And and honestly, we get to do it for free, right? Hey, we get to do it for free. And what an incredible community. And I moved here about 12 years ago. I grew up in a bigger area. You drive down 20 minutes, you're in town, you have an incredible speaker, you go home, you grab a bite to eat. Doesn't cost you anything, right? I love that. And I have the privilege of working at the museum and the Holocaust Center, in which exactly what you're talking about. We're local. We talk about our own house here. We start in Southern Arizona about what we can do here. We talk about our survivors. We talk about our history. And then we bring in speakers and we challenge one another. All right? Is Jewish philanthropy working? We're asking ourselves the questions. And we get to do that for free. We have the museum that's free. And anything that you do to invest in that, and we talked about it last time, $5 a month. $5 a month. You just click it, you go, and we get to have these conversations. And nobody can tell us that the Jews haven't been here for over 114 years. That's how old our building is. So we keep the building here, we continue the stories, we challenge ourselves, and we make sure that we invest in the important things. So we appreciate any investment you can do, and we're going to keep everything free as much as we can. You have a trifold with future speakers, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you.